This is the Ring of Honor, a.k.a. Shane T, boy, the baddest champion you ever seen, boy.
This is Mr. Anderson.
This is good old JR Jim Ross, and you are listening.
You're listening to Knockouts in 3 Counts.
Cover! We got it, the new world champion!
That might be one of the craziest knockouts I've ever seen in my life.
Knockouts in 3 Counts is the podcast leading to the real deal, baby!
Knockouts in 3 Counts starts now.
Ooh, what up, everybody? This is Kyle. This is another episode of Knockouts in 3 Counts. I survived the fucking mail again, so we're here for another Tuesday, and we're bringing you something a little different. Any of you guys have been paying attention for a while, and if you've already hit that subscribe button, which if you haven't, it's right down there in the right corner. Hit that shit. Anyways, yeah, man, for any of you guys that have been following the show for a long time, you know how big of a deal Jiu Jitsu has been in my life, being a purple belt myself. Well, Fury Grappling is getting ready to get started by the homies over at CFFC, so I figured, I was looking down my Instagram the other day and realized some bitch, one of them is already following me, so I figured, let's see if we can get him on the show. So, without any further ado, we've got the man himself, Dillon D-Boy Masington. How the hell you doing, brother man?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem, dude. No problem. You got to let them know where they can find you on social media, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so Instagram, I'm Dillon D-Boy M, and then Facebook is just Dillon D-Boy Masington.
You don't got the Twitters?
Nah, I feel like Twitter's more for like super famous people.
Bro, you got 10,000 followers on Instagram, dude. Like, you act like nobody's following what you're doing.
That's true. I'm not good at writing the long things, and if I write too much, people will be like, I'm unfollowing. So I just stick to the pictures and the videos.
So that's the thing. Like, doing this shit with the show, man, it's the funniest thing in the world because it's like you have to figure out like what things will get people to look at stuff. And I've realized at this point, if you put like some really like random shit in the or a quote or something in the caption, like I don't know why it always seems to do better, but like, dude, I see these people with all these followers on social media. I'm like, man, fuck you. Did you pay for them or what? You know what I mean?
But you see certain things, like certain keywords makes people want to like it more than other things.
It's the dumbest thing. You could like literally do hours of research on that shit and never get anywhere. But speaking of hours of time doing something, you've got, quite the interesting match at Fury Grappling Championship. You've got your black belt yourself. So before we get into Fury Grappling, tell me how the hell you stumbled upon jiu-jitsu and why you chose straight jiu-jitsu versus MMA or boxing.
So originally I started back training martial arts in 2000. My parents said that I had to play a sport to stay social. So, like, I tried baseball, I tried soccer, I tried a couple of gymnastics, stuff like that. And eventually we got to karate, and I felt like karate out of all of them, now I'm only 5 or 6 at the time, was the least, like, social one that I could do that would take the least amount of time so I could get back home and, like, do what I wanted. So I'm like, you know what, forget those team sports. This is easier. I'll go 3 days a week. There's no one else at this thing. I'll just do karate. So I started with that. That was for 2 years. I just did straight stand-up. I competed a couple times. Then eventually my parents caught on to what I was doing, and they're like, well, there's no other kids other than your sister at this, so maybe you should do a school sport. So then I was like, oh. So then I was like, well, I don't want to do football. I don't want to do baseball or anything like that. So I was like, I'll do wrestling. I thought it was like WWE. So when I got there, like I found out it wasn't. So then I was kind of disappointed at that. But I started the wrestling in 2002. And then, so I had to stick with it. I just suffered through that. And then in 2003, my dad used to go to this like big gym where they started doing jiu-jitsu classes in this like dance studio. And the one time I went, they had a wrestling match like all rolled up. And like I would climb on top and I would go from each one to the other one, and I had a lot of fun. But my dad was like, well, if you're going to come and climb on those things, I want you to do a little bit of the classes. So then I was like, all right, I'll trade that off for getting to play on the mat. So then I started doing jiu-jitsu off of that. So then up until 2000, I would say like 7, I did all 3 disciplines, competed in all 3 of them up to that point. And I was like, well, I know what I want to do. I definitely want to fight MMA. So then I started training strictly for MMA. Like I did jiu-jitsu, I did the striking, but not as serious as I used to. I was specifically training for that. Then when I hit my freshman year in high school, people were talking about how like important wrestling is, not just for MMA, but like for college and stuff like that. So I was like, well, maybe I should focus on wrestling more than the others for while I'm in high school. So I did still train MMA, but I took that took a backseat to the wrestling. So during wrestling season, that's all I did. I stopped everything else, focused on that. And then during the off season, would go back and focus on MMA. Then going up into my senior year, I ended up getting burned out mentally and going through some stuff to where I ended up just quitting everything. I quit wrestling my senior year, quit jiu-jitsu, quit striking, and I quit the MMA. And for like a good 3 to 4 months, I had no like urges to go back. But then eventually my ex-girlfriend at the time, she really helped me and pushed me to get back into it. So then I was able to slowly come back, and I started doing a little bit of MMA, but mostly jiu-jitsu, because at this time wrestling's done. I already, like, it was my senior year, I can't go back. So that was gone. And I wasn't into the striking as much as the jiu-jitsu. So I was like, I'll do jiu-jitsu 75% of the time, focus on MMA, and work the striking there. But then I took some of the worst beatings that I've ever experienced. Just training. I have pictures where I'm so messed up. So the training probably wasn't going the completely right way. Like back then, this was 2012, 2013. It was more like get in there and just go crazy.
That was the Wild Wild West, bro.
Right. There was one certain experience where I got a broken nose. I was supposed to go to Texas to do a competition. And I went to the hospital and got cleared to do it. So I was good. And I don't know why, but the next day I went in, sparred, and ended up getting like not knocked unconscious, but to the point where I couldn't stand up. Go to the ER, they're like, you have a concussion. I'm like, well, I could probably suffer through it and still go. That night I woke up throwing up, like sweating, couldn't do anything. After that, I was like, you know what? Maybe I should just get back into jiu-jitsu and see what happens there. And because at this point, I'm going to get burned out again physically this time. So then I started in 2014 was really when I got serious in jiu-jitsu. And that's when I started to take it more as like, oh, I might want to do this as a job. And then from 2014 to 2017, that's what I did. I just focused on jiu-jitsu. And then I eventually started fighting the best in the world at jiu-jitsu. So I went against Gordon Ryan. And I was like, if I fight MMA, I'm going to go from fighting Gordon Ryan to some random kid who's never fought before. So like, what's the point of that? Like, if I wasn't fighting these amazing people in grappling, then maybe I'll do MMA. Plus, I have Asperger's, so I have trouble putting on gloves. The feeling of it led to a lot of fights, so that was a huge thing. And then on top of it, if I go into an MMA fight, I'm just going to try and do jiu-jitsu. So what's really the difference? Like, I might as well just stick to what I'm semi-good at, as compared to the striking, where like my competitions were not good at striking. So that's basically my full story. And then up until 2017, I ended up breaking my hand. So that was my first real break, other than the little break I took in 2012. And then I ended up having to get a full-time job. I work at my dad's law office now. So I'm not training full-time anymore. It's not what I do for a living, but it's still the main thing I do in my free time.
All right, so you uncovered a few things that we got to talk about. Now, first of all, I for some reason thought you said you had autism when we talked before. So mistakenly, I got my stuff mixed up.
No, you're right. The correct term is autism. It used to be called Asperger's, but
I asked that because I didn't get to talk to you as much in the DM about it, but when you told me that really strikes home for me. So that's very similar to the story that I had, except I think we went like the opposite path, where like I got into fighting when I was 13. 13 maybe. So we're talking 2005, 2006. And I grew up with cerebral palsy. So when I was a kid, couldn't cut with scissors, couldn't tie my shoes, couldn't write my name, I had to wear braces and shit and do all that stuff. Well, obviously, as you can probably relate to, and anybody who's listening to this, hell, you don't even got to have health issues to be able to relate to it, but that made me a fucking target. So I had to deal with a lot of that shit when I was younger. So my mom took me down to the boxing gym in Detroit and was like, well, you're either going to learn how to fight or you're already getting your ass whooped anyway. So one way or the other, you're going to learn. And so for me, I started with straight boxing. But the reason why I bring this up is not to talk about myself. It's to ask, when it comes to jiu-jitsu, I know for me with my cerebral palsy. So when I first started to learn, like, let's say triangles, for example, switching from an armbar to a triangle to, omoplata and just going through the different transitions. It took me a while to be able to get my hips active enough to where I could go from 1 to 1 to 1. Because even though it didn't really affect me anymore by the time I started training, I don't know how to put it. It's just like certain movements are weird depending on where your stuff's affected. And it's crazy that you say you had Asperger's, because through jiu-jitsu, I've worked with a lot of kids with disabilities, kids with everything from Asperger's to Down syndrome to pretty much anything you can name, because I ran the exercise group for my doctor. Well, I got to work with a kid who had Asperger's, and it was tough as hell at first, because he was like real timid to contact and things. So you kind of had to get him up out of that. And you had to be a little tough on him, because I feel like a lot of kids who deal with that stuff, at least from my own experience, like not all parents push them. Like your parents clearly pushed you and mine clearly pushed me. It doesn't always happen that way. So it took me a little while to kind of be able to break through that wall, but to be able to help other people with that kind of stuff and see, like, dude, I got hit up. And this is another good question for you. I want to know, how the hell did you ever end up on the U.S. Paralympic team? Or did they ever contact you about that?
No. So like growing up,
I only say that because I thought, for me, I'm like, why the hell are they calling me? Because I'm not like I've never gone in anything other than just the normal whatever division it was in. So I never even thought that there was a thing like that. And I ended up training with this guy who knew the guy who ran it. And they asked me to come compete for them at Purple Belt in England. And I never got to make it happen because of the time with work and stuff. But I thought about that when you told me that. I'm like, shit, this dude would have been perfect for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, like, throughout my entire life, it's been a struggle, but the doctors had trouble diagnosing what it was. Originally, they had it as separation anxiety from my parents, which that's what I thought it was for the whole beginning of my life, because I just couldn't leave my parents' side. Then it switched from 5 to, I would say, up to my senior year. They said OCD, straight OCD, which that started making sense too. Then my senior year, this is when I ended up quitting everything. The doctor said I had pandas, which is a form of something with strep throat leading to OCD. And they put me on medicine for schizophrenia, which I don't have that. And that's what ended up leading to my depression and me quitting everything, because I ended up having those symptoms. I didn't leave. I stayed in the basement and curled up into a ball and just like hid from everything because I was hearing things, and it was just a bad time. And like I said, my family and my ex pushed me through it. They got me to go back, and we got off the medicine, while the doctor, they wanted to keep pushing me on it. And then we treated it as OCD up until last year, where the doctor who I'm seeing now is like, this is autism, it's Asperger's. You have OCD tendencies, but it's definitely leans more towards that, because there's things I was dealing with that it didn't make sense why it was OCD. But now we finally got a clear answer.
Good. Dude, I could completely relate with that, because Corey could tell you just as well as anybody. We just had a scare myself with my Crohn's and stuff, because I got diagnosed with that. I got diagnosed with Crohn's when I was 13. Yeah, 13. Yeah, we were in middle school, so yeah, it had to have been 13. And I got diagnosed when I was 13. I didn't even know it was like a hereditary thing. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know that it ran in the family. I didn't even know what it was. So I had to like go on the internet and just what is Crohn's and just try to read whatever I could like find to figure out what the hell is going on. And it was crazy because I had something similar like that, except mine ended up in surgery. I was actually training for a jiu-jitsu tournament. And you know this, if you cut weight at all, you know, they turned the gym into a fucking sauna. So they turned all the air off. We're all sweating our ass off. The mat is like a lake. And, you know, my coach is getting all over me like, get back on the mat. Cause I'm sure I'd love to ask you that question next. But for me, I always kind of had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder because I always felt like I had to prove myself to everybody else. So they knew I would never complain about being hurt. Problem with that is then the one time there really was an issue. I was like, yeah, sure. We'll keep training. Well, I went to the hospital that night and they go, so I need you to sign this paperwork. We're going to take out your appendix, 6 inches of your small bowel, and your ileocecal valve all at once for my Crohn's. And I'm like, fuck. I didn't really know what to say to that. So it's like, I totally commend you for all that you've gotten to do in jiu-jitsu, even dealing with that. So that leads me into the question of what I wanted to ask you. Starting out jiu-jitsu or even now, is there anything in particular that you found like specifically hard for you? Like for me, I know when I first started, I never liked to play like a lot of rubber guard stuff or like De La Hiva or that kind of stuff because I had to maneuver my legs a ton. Now I don't care. I can do all of it, but I kind of like molded my jiu-jitsu game to like what were my strengths. Like for me, I like a lot of upper body chokes, like arm triangles, anacondas, guillotines, anything like that, because my upper body can squeeze the life out of somebody and I don't need to have the fucking flexibility. So for you, what if anything sticks out that was particularly hard for you with jiu-jitsu?
So the hardest thing for me is everyone knows if you train with me, I don't do any technique. I can't learn. If you show me, like tonight, I trained with someone and they're like, oh, let's go over this. I'm like, I have no idea what that is or how to do it, but I can do it rolling. And when I was younger, it was a struggle because all these people would be like, you're not learning anything. You must not be paying attention. You're not trying. I got a lot of that. You're not trying. And I'm like, I am. I don't know how to do it. And then I would go out in the matches and the things would happen and everyone would be like, see, you were making it up. You do know how to do it. So then I would be asked to like teach or show things or help people out or coach. And it's hard for me because I don't know how to do anything. I just do it.
Yep. That makes total sense.
I'll be asked, when I was younger, let me see an arm bar from guard. And I would be like, I don't know how. And everyone would be like, you just don't want to do it. You're being lazy. And I'm like, I don't know how. And then I would flail around and they'd be like, this is so embarrassing. And then next thing you know, I'm hitting the arm bar when doing the live stuff.
So did you ever, how far into jiu-jitsu did your coaches know that you had, Asperger's or autism or whatever they may have thought at the time it was? Because see, that was something I had to deal with a lot first too, is you had to kind of like explain to people like, look, dude, like I'm, like different things might take me a little bit longer to like, because I was the same way. Like I said, anything that was upper body, like I could go from a guillotine to an arm triangle to anaconda, and I can go through them all just like that. But then when it came to the other stuff, like it was different for me. So like, did they know from jump when you started training with these guys, like you had anything going on, or did you always try to keep it under the low?
So my dad was the owner of the gym because my dad bought an MMA gym when I started jiu-jitsu. So he was like the owner, and like all the instructors knew at the time what they thought was OCD, but they just thought, it doesn't really matter. Up until I think 2014, when I really started doing it full time, we tried to get me to learn and stuff, but ever since then, it's just been me. I come in, I roll, I do my thing on my own, and that's it. I'll go to other gyms, I'll train with the black belts, blah, blah, blah. If you try and show me something, I'll listen, but it's just not going to stick. So the only way I learn is by rolling. So since 2014, that's all I do. I go in, I roll, and then I'm done.
That's such an interesting dynamic to me, really, that's the way that it, I guess, boils out in your mind, that it's not like a drilling technique or anything like that. It doesn't even like you said, it doesn't even stick. It doesn't even. It's not worth the time essentially. But live rolling is where you actually gain the experience. That's interesting to me. Honestly.
Right. Whenever we go to other gyms, my dad says we don't want to waste your time, and he's not being rude, but it's just not worth it. We can try if you really want, but you're going to be like, oh, this kid's lying, and then think I'm like one of the guys who comes in and just tries to beat everyone by acting like I don't know anything.
I completely can relate with that, because that was, like I said, I mean, so that brings up another good question. So you said that you learn best from rolling and things like that. Like, for you, is it one of those things, at least, and Corey, this is something like you may have heard other people say, but for me, it's like, for me, I have go-to things that I like to go to, but at the same time, most of the time when I roll, like the submissions I'll go for, a lot of the time are all based upon however my opponent comes at me, or vice versa. So for you, do you think the fact that, you're just rolling, do you think that helps you out mentally at all during your matches? Because you don't have to think as much. It's kind of just.
Yeah, well, I don't really think about any of the stuff during the matches anyways. Like,
nice.
Unlike most people, this has been probably what people would say is my downfall, and why I never really got to that highest level, is because I like Jiu Jitsu. It's what I do, but it's not, I don't watch it. I don't follow the sport. I don't love it, but I like doing it. I like it for me. If something happens where I couldn't train, that would be it for my Jiu Jitsu career. Like, I'm not coming in to teach. I'm not going to watch it, blah, blah, blah. So for me, it's more, it's easier mentally in some ways than it is for other people in that aspect.
You see that a lot in the fight game, because that's where my end of the podcast is generally in the MMA based stuff. And you see that a lot in the fight game, where they'll train 6 days a week. They'll do everything they can to improve themselves in the sport, but they're like, I haven't watched, the last fight I watched was Connor last year. It's like they just don't have interest in actually watching other people perform. They enjoy what they're able to do from the sport, I guess.
Right. So I used to love watching it, but when I went to, my first UFC was UFC 30 something that I actually went to in person. Yeah. So there was a point where we were going to fights every weekend, tournaments every weekend. So I've seen tens of thousands of fights, to the point where I think around 2013, 2014, I was just like, oh my God, I can't watch anymore. I've seen every single outcome that could happen.
So I can completely relate with that. So like Corey said, he is more on the MMA side, where our show, at its origins is, pro wrestling, MMA, and boxing. So Corey never got to train with me when we were kids. He actually happened to be at my last boxing fight, where I actually got knocked out because I fought a guy 20 pounds heavier than me. But he never got to train with us as kids. Now, for me, I started boxing when I was 13. So that would have been the end of 2005. And then I started jiu-jitsu after I switched over to my MASH gym in 2006. So it all kind of started for me around that time. But what's funny is with what he was talking about just how those things machinate. He could watch every fight that happens. This motherfucker will sit at a table and watch every fucking fight. For me, I've gotten to the same point like you, where I can watch all the big ones, right? But going to the regional fights and going to different stuff like that, it's got to be something that really pulls me out. It's different. We'll just say, for instance, since you're on the show, if you were fighting at the card that we were about to go to, that's different. I got reason to go there. If there were guys that I know that I train with that are fighting, again, that's different. But for fights, just for the sake of going to fights, dude, when I first started going to fights, it was back in you'll know exactly what I'm going to say, but the Wild West of MMA. You had guys show up in gym shorts, and 9 times out of 10, if the other guy knew a takedown and could get on top of the other guy, he just pounded the shit out of the other dude until the fight was over. And like you said, once you see so many fights, it just becomes old hat. Like even with wrestling, man, I started watching wrestling at 6, but now that we've been doing this show for 4 years, I mean, I got to keep up on all the fights and all the wrestling and shit. Sometimes, man, you just be like, all right, I'm good. Like I need a mental break from wrestling and MMA. That brings up a cool question though. So you said you got to go to a lot of the fights. Which ones have you got to go to, and are there any of them that really stick out to you? Because for me, I've been to 4 or 5 UFCs, and then I've been to a few Bellator cards. I got to go when Chuck Liddell got knocked out by Rashad. I got to go when Brock Lesnar beat Randy Couture in Vegas. And then I was there when for Henan Barao versus TJ Dillashaw in Chicago, because one of my good friends and past guests of the show who just fought this past weekend, but we still ride Team Fury in this bitch. My buddy Miles Jury was fighting. He's fighting for Bellator, but yeah, like I said, we've been around the game a long time, so I totally can relate with that.
So it's funny that you mentioned him. One of the early like regional fights that I went to was Miles Jury versus one of our main guys back in the day.
Who was it?
Joel Roberts. It was in King of the Cage back in like 2007. Miles knocked him out, but it's just funny that you brought him up.
Miles had a killer instinct back then, man. Like I tell you, like he may not show it as much in his fights before, but let me tell you, when I first started training with that dude, like I started training with him when he was 19, I was 16. So this is before he ever got into UFC, fucking Bellator, any of that. He was still fighting at Royal Oak Music Theater and, like you said, King of the Cage. And man, that's a hell of a story that one of your guys ended up fighting him. That's funny.
Yeah, he was really good. But so the first two UFCs I went to, I passed out and I woke up getting carried back to the hotel room because I was so young. I was like 5 or 6, and like I had no idea what was going on. The first one that I remember was a UFC 50 with like Patrick Cote versus Tito Ortiz. Then I went to UFC 53. I don't really remember many of the fights. I know Evan Tanner was on it. The one thing I do remember is during those fights, like this was back when after the fights, I would go down and get pictures. So I have pictures with Robbie Lawler right after he got knocked out. I have a picture with David Loiseau, Tim Sylvia, all these guys.
That's a name.
There was nobody at these fights, so I was able to just walk around, and I was the only kid at the time. So it was like really fun to get to meet the famous fighters at the time and do stuff like that. Then I went a couple years ago, and it's completely different. Like, you can't get to the cage anymore, obviously, and stuff like that. Like, there's so many people, security, and it just wasn't the same. And I was like, But I've been to some regional shows that were fun back in the day. But then there was something called New Breed Fighters back in like 2006, 2007. They used to do shows at the Showboat, and I'm not kidding, they would have 50 fights. We'd go at 6 in the afternoon, and I just remember laying on chairs at 4 in the morning like, oh my God, can this please end?
It was really like that, even here, dude. Like back, Corey, like you weren't even around for these, dude. When MMA first came around here, dude, you'd go to a fight at the Yak Arena, and it would literally start at about 6 or 7 o'clock. If you got out of there before there were times I remember being in them fights where the main event wouldn't even walk to the fucking cage till 1:45.
Yeah, it was rough.
Like we'd be there, like you said, all fucking day. And the worst part is when they were them long cards, it always ended up being something where like your guy would be at like the ass end of the card. So you had to like stay through all of them. There was no like
and then if the guy gets killed, your guy, then it's like, oh my God, everyone's
it's like I waited all that time for nothing.
I spent 6 hours here in anticipation, dying for this fight, and then my boy gets smoked, and it's just like, what do I do? Do I spend the rest of the time? Do I bother watching the rest of the like? Yeah,
if I was a little bit older, I don't know how I would have taken it, but back then I thought these guys were like world famous, so there was that to it where I tried to like push through. My dad would be like, "You don't have to go." I'm like, "I'm going." But as I got older, I started to realize, wait, these are just random people who want to fight. Like, They're high school kids. I'm like, I'm not going to waste my time there.
There's definitely levels to this game, but you know, that's a perfect segue to bring it back to you. We got Fury Grappling coming up. So first of all, like Corey said, you know, you're getting to be one of the first ones to go at it for Fury Grappling. What are your thoughts on getting to show your craft on UFC Fight Pass, and how did it come to be for you to come to Fury Grappling?
So I follow Jonathan, or I'm not sure if it's Jonathan or Donovan, but he fought in the UFC web. He's the promoter, and we have each other on Instagram, and I saw him post something like, oh, if you want to apply for this new show, and he tagged me, and so I just threw my name in there. I apply for a lot of things. Sometimes people get back to me, sometimes they don't. It's hard from like a small gym to get on bigger cards because, one, I'm not affiliated with anyone. It's like they'll be like, oh, who you under? I'm like,
yep.
Well, I'm basically by myself. But I got the email, and they were like, oh, let's do a match at 155. I'm like, sounds good. Then they were like, oh, could you do 175? I'm like, sure, because I'm not going to give up the opportunity to go on this first card because there's only going to be one of the first. So then I was like, awesome. But then when they announced the UFC Fight Pass, like I've been trying to get on stuff that's been on UFC Fight Pass for years now. And like that was one of like my final goals was to say, hey, I made it to UFC Fight Pass.
Yeah, that is definitely a cool little accomplishment to be able to have. And all that stuff gets archived as well, so you'll be able to pull it back up at any given point too. So. And
like the people around where I live really don't follow anything. But if I say UFC Fight Pass, that means more than ADCC champions, EBI champions. To them, they don't know the difference. Like that stuff's way harder. Is worth a lot more, but to the average person or a person who doesn't know, when they hear the words UFC, that means way more.
Yeah.
Do you even UFC, bro? All right, so we talked a little bit about Fury Grappling and how you got there. What are your thoughts on your matchup? Because I don't know, man. I was looking some stuff up on you. I was looking some stuff up on your opponent. I don't know, man. It looks like it's got some fireworks in store. So what are your thoughts on your matchup at Fury Grappling Championship?
It's definitely going to be a top one. I'm going to be giving up a little bit of weight. Luckily, he's not huge, like tall. He is shorter. He's like my style is more like it's weird. I can wrestle if we're wrestling, but in jiu-jitsu, I'm not too keen on wrestling, and my style changes. So some of my worst matchups are against wrestlers in jiu-jitsu, especially short wrestlers, because the stuff that I look for, it's hard to get because their limbs are a lot shorter. I've been like fighting. I do absolute. The biggest guy I fought was 385. I fought guys who were in the UFC at heavyweight and light heavyweight. Eric Red Schaefer is like 6 foot something, 260 pounds when I went against him. But to me, they're easier to get under and get stuff because there's so much. And for them, it's going to be harder on me because my limbs are
There's not as much to get to.
So him being shorter but then bigger is going to give me some problems. The wrestling is going to be an issue. But I don't stop. I go for the submissions, and whatever happens, happens. Like I said, I don't think I just go out there and try to survive and get off as much damage as possible.
I like it, man. That's a good game plan. And I mean, that's crazy. So can you talk a little bit about that for me? So you mentioned that you went against Eric Red Schaefer. Now, as you can tell from the video screen that you're looking at, I'm not the biggest guy either. So I've been fighting dudes a lot bigger than me my entire fucking life. Like my first boxing fight, oh my God, I wish I'd have thought and grabbed it because I still have the picture from my first passport. My first fight I took, I was 5'3", 125 pounds for that fight. And I could never make it that light again. But the reason I bring that up is because in jiu-jitsu, that's like a normal occurrence. Like every gym I've ever trained at, I'm always one of the smallest guys. So at this point, it doesn't even bother me to go into a gym and be like, okay, well, he's bigger. Well, fuck it. I mean, that's kind of normal, commonplace at this point for me. So what are some of the biggest things for you that made facing somebody that much bigger than you hard to play your game in?
So for when I go against people that are much bigger, obviously the hardest thing for me is going to be the strength usually. But I'd rather face the strength than someone who's quick and not going to tire out. Like, to me, I could take a beating and get squeezed and yeah, it might suck, but to me, I can suffer through that and make it to the end of the match and maybe pick up the win. Where cardio, I mean, you go with some of those 25-pounders, you can't keep up with them and they never tire out. Like 125, I competed there for a long time, was the hardest weight class I've ever done. And to me, it's just not worth it. First of all, it's way harder. And second of all, the weight cut is not worth it. So I'm just like, I'd rather take my chances with the big guy. Plus, for a while, like, I was focused on just being entertaining because originally I just wanted to have like a reality show, or I was into WWE and stuff like that. And I wanted to put on a show. So like, I could go against a 25-pounder who's the best in the world and win, and people be like, he's 125. Who cares? If I go against a 200-pound guy and lose, it's like, oh my God, that was amazing, super entertaining, blah, blah, blah. So like the benefits weighed the cons out by a lot. Yeah, like Eric Schaefer destroyed me. I was caught in the head arm triangle in 30 seconds, and I just was like, oh my God, I almost passed out, got tapped. But everyone respected me more for that than some of my wins. So I'm like, oh.
I can completely relate with that on the small end, but you just opened a whole mother can of worms. So let's take it off jiu-jitsu a little bit. So you say you're a WWE fan. What was the time period where you started watching wrestling, and do you keep up with it at all now?
So with the Asperger's and everything, one of the things is I become obsessed to the point that all I want to talk about is whatever I'm obsessed on at the time. So for, I think, 3 or 4 years, from 2005 to 2009, my entire life was pro wrestling. All my training for jiu-jitsu MMA was based off of pro wrestling. I would spend 10, 11 hours on the trampoline doing tricks and everything. And like, I learned to do backflips. I've done backflips in my actual grappling matches. I can do most of the tricks that they do in WWE. I used to have a ring in my gym. I could do springboards, shooting star presses.
Damn, guy.
Yeah, a whole bunch of stuff. Originally, I wanted to be in the WWE, but then the traveling and everything, I was like, and I'm more into the high flying stuff. And I know a lot of the like.
See, you'd love AEW and NXT then.
Yeah, so eventually I started to fall out of it because things started changing. I really like the original, well, not the original, but like the 2005 brand split.
Ruthless aggression area, yeah.
Right, exactly. As soon as we started getting PG and like SmackDown had the same guys as Raw, I started falling out of it. I eventually came back a couple times up until 2017. That was when like I really, WWE is just so painful to watch right now.
I completely agree. Raw, so here's the thing. And this is being completely honest, because Corey is not the biggest wrestling guy either, and has kind of had to play catch up now that he started doing the show with us. But I would say, and it's something we talk about all the time, I feel like the biggest thing that's changed between the era that you're talking about in that when you started watching wrestling and what we're seeing today, I feel like one of the biggest problems is back when you were watching, and obviously I was still watching at that time too, because I was still in high school. I was watching all the time. One of the biggest things you see now that you didn't see then is I feel like people were so much more invested in the story of what's going on, where now if you were to turn on Monday Night Raw, I mean, if you listen to Busted Open, which if you guys are checking this out, you can check out our interviews with Dave LaGreca and Ryan McKinnell making his way back before that McGregor fight, but I digress. Anyways, so on Busted Open, they talk about it a lot, about how WWE acts almost as though that fans don't have a long enough attention span. I feel like the biggest thing you see different now is like, if we just take just the WWE brands, like the three you got, so you got Raw, SmackDown, and NXT. Mm-hmm. The biggest disconnect, I think, and I think you'd agree with, is back when we were watching back in 05, 09, that kind of era, even then you still had like the stories continued to go. Like, okay, here's a storyline that I'm sure you'll remember since this is when you said you were watching. Randy Orton versus Undertaker. They fought each other for the better part of 2 fucking years, but they split each other apart and there would be different, feuds in between it, to where now it's almost like as soon as you start getting invested to be like, oh shit, I kind of want to see how this is about to play out. Either they'll just up and quit somebody's shit or like, you know what I mean? So like I could completely relate to that. But see, that's what's so crazy now, even in 2021, because you have in the jiu-jitsu background, we're starting to see so much of that integrated with pro wrestling, and it fucking makes my heart so happy being from both ends of the spectrum. It's cool to see guys going like Matt Riddle being in WWE right now. It's fucking insane.
Matt Riddle actually started at my gym and lived with me for 2 months at my house when I was younger.
Oh,
No shit. You got to tell us that story, dude, because I've gotten to meet Riddle a few times before he got into WWE when he was working with Evolve and all that kind of stuff, and he couldn't have been a cooler dude. I remember the first thing, Miles will come up again in this interview, but that was the first thing we linked up over to. He's like, oh, I know him. Like, so yeah, tell me about that.
And me and Matt, when I was younger, like he showed up, he was a state champion wrestler, and he was like, could beat everyone basically when he first showed up in the gym. And I was in 7th grade, 6th grade maybe when I first met him. Nicest guy. We had so much fun together. He ended up coming over, and at the time, he probably doesn't remember this, but like he had one amateur fight, and like he would come over and hang out for a while. He stayed at our house. He would have sleepovers. And he would talk and be like, MMA is so much better than pro wrestling. But at the time, I was like into pro wrestling. So we would argue, and I would be like, oh, I hate MMA compared to pro wrestling. It's way tougher, blah, blah, blah. And he used to actually rip on it, which is funny now because he switched. But we would go out on the trampoline. He actually, my first trampoline, which I spent so much time on, he did a swanton bomb off my deck. And the whole thing just went and folded up into a fly trap. So he broke my first trampoline. He ended up getting on Ultimate Fighter, and he stayed with us the weeks leading up to before he left. And then when he came back, he went to Arizona, and that's when like I looked up to him back then. We reconnected. We have some issues, not anything serious, but our personalities conflict sometimes. But he was at the gym for a while before he made the switch to pro wrestling. I actually went to his tryout with him at
No shit, that's cool.
ROH, yeah.
So we've gotten to do a. Did you watch ROH at all, or were you a straight WWE guy?
So I was WWE, TNA. I tried ROH for a little bit. I was more into like obscure WWE wrestlers. So like I like the cruiserweight division in WWE. But like ROH was a little too much for me. It was, like I said, a little too flippy, where I like the flips, but if it's all flips, then it's too much.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite wrestlers were like Shannon Moore, Jamie Noble, Nunzio, all those guys. But nothing ever happened with them, so that's kind of why I drifted away, because I would be like, oh, they're finally going to do something with them, and nothing. I'm like, ugh.
So that's it. That's interesting. Those are names I wasn't expecting to come out with right now. All right.
Rene Dupree was another one I really liked. Carlito, he had some success. I really enjoyed him. And then there was a few bigger name ones at the time. They weren't like The Miz. I loved The Miz from the real world. So I loved him as soon as he came over. Now he's a huge star. So everyone likes him. But back then they hated him. Everyone loves Jeff Hardy. Really liked him. And Rey Mysterio is probably my all-time favorite growing up.
Okay. So you're going to be just fine doing all this media for Fury Grappling because, hot damn, man, you make my job easy. So that's funny because, when it comes to wrestling, like, I feel like everybody kind of like goes in phases. If you watch long enough, like at one point, like you'll like the fast paced guys, or like if you're really young, like a Hulk Hogan or a Batista or a guy like that, holy shit, the guy's a superhero. But for me, it was funny. My all-time favorite has always remained the same, although the first person that ever like caught my eye and why I started watching wrestling. I started watching because where my mom would send me like to the babysitter when I was real young. I was probably maybe 5 or 6, maybe something like that. And The Undertaker was the first guy I saw. And him come out with that entrance and the lights and the gong and all that shit scared the shit out of me as a kid. Because I'm like, what the hell is this guy? Like, what the this guy's 7 foot tall and looks like he's going to kill everybody. What the fuck am I watching? And crazy how things work out, man, because I actually got to link up with Austin a couple years ago in New Orleans at WrestleMania. And, dude, what you see on TV and what you see in person are not too far off. It's really not, because it was funny. I told him I had met him once before and just bust out mid-sentence. Well, it's a fucking family reunion. So, everything that you would think that you would get out of meeting Stone Cold is cool. So it's cool to know that you were into wrestling as well, because like I said, wrestling is also a big part of our show. And since I know that you are a fan of that time period, I'll definitely send you the links to our stuff with like Booker T and Eric Bischoff and all those guys. So yeah, man, we've been banging it out a little bit.
So I don't get nervous for matches, but then I heard CM Punk was commentating the matches. So now like I'm straight edge because of CM Punk. I have a tattoo and everything. So to know that he's gonna be talking and like I'm like, oh my God, I hope I don't get killed, because that would suck.
That's fucking awesome, because I was going to ask you that once you said you're a wrestling fan. So now that you've opened that can of worms, what are your thoughts into his parlays into MMA?
I thought it was cool. Like, I enjoyed that. Was something I watched as opposed to the other stuff. Like, I like that. I was more invested. Obviously, I was a fan beforehand, so it's a little different. But like stuff like that, or even like the Paul brothers, that makes you want to watch it more than, I don't know, some of these other like actually good fights.
It's the story of it, man. Even if it's like with you being a pro wrestling fan, it's like, have you ever heard the saying, like, you can hate a heel as much as you want, but if he makes you that mad that he fucking makes you want to see somebody get beat up, then he's done his job.
Right.
It's that kind of thing. Like, I've realized that a lot of the guys I hated when I was younger, I hated them because I realized how good they are now. Like, I look back and I'm like, dude, these motherfuckers had people ready to riot.
That's the whole thing. You gotta have skills to be able to build that off of. You can't just like you can be a little shithead all you want. You can start all the drama and shit all you want, but you have to have the skills to back it up when put into the position. So a lot of those guys, like you say, they earn that spot.
All right, so before I let you get out of here, I'm going to hit you with one more non-jiu-jitsu question before I let you give your final thoughts about Fury Grappling on the second. So, again, in my vast research, because I try to be prepared in this motherfucker and bring you the best stuff from here at Knockouts and 3 Counts, I hear that you're a fan of Back to the Future. I am a huge fan of Back to the Future, man.
Actually, I just saw for the first time them yesterday. So I was like, oh my God, these are amazing. And I posted it up.
Okay. So which one did you like the best of the 3, and why the fuck did it take you so long to watch Back to the Future? Like, I used to watch them back in the day when your mom had the DVD player that came out the ceiling. I used to play them bitches on repeat in there to the point where they stopped working.
I was like, Mom, why didn't you ever show me these movies? And they're like, oh, we don't really like them that much. But my favorite, I would have to say, would be the first one. I liked the third, I think, up until the ending, and then it kind of dropped it down to my least favorite. I liked it all the way until that train showed up, and then they weren't stuck in the past or whatever. I'm like, oh, that ruins the whole movie. So 3 was definitely the worst. I did like 2, but 1, I think the story was the best in 1.
Yeah, I think 1's got to be my all-time favorite too, only for the simple fact that like 1 kind of like lays the table for the rest of them, even though they don't necessarily go in like straight order, if that makes sense. Like, they basically go in order, but like you can see where they like. I feel like one has to always be the number one best, only for the reason that you gave. Like, that kind of really sets the table so that you know what's going to happen in the next ones. Because without one, I feel like the other two would have just been like a shit show. But I'm still kind of jealous that they came out with the Marty McFly Nikes, and I need to go get those. And shout out to Mikey getting married at FSW in Vegas today, man. Shout out to the homies from Breaking Down the Ring. I'm jealous that you got married in a wrestling ring, bro. Well chosen. But all right, man, we're getting towards the end of our time. So before we get out of here, like I said, if you have any last thoughts on your match this weekend at Fury Grappling, and do you know, and if you want to keep doing these super fight things, or what's kind of next on the horizon for Dillon D-Boy Masington?
Yeah, so I just want to say before anything, thank you to my girlfriend, Kayla Rivera. She's my best friend, and without her, I don't know where I would be right now. She found me at another hard time I was going through back in 2018. She really got me refocused and back after I went down with the broken hand. I didn't think I would ever be back at this level of competing, but she got me focused again, and I can't thank her enough. Next, I'm hoping to just keep putting on shows. I would like to do combat jiu-jitsu at least one more time. I would like to try and get a knockout or get knocked out just to have it on the bucket list of things that I have done or accomplished. Hopefully I get a shot at one of those again. And I just want to like meet as many people as possible. This is the way I make friends. I don't drink, I don't party, so it's hard for me to socialize, but I want to, and this is a great way to do it. I meet people and I can be myself, because if something goes wrong, we roll, and then they're like, oh, he's tough, and then they'll give me a second shot. But that's all I got.
Corey, you got anything else for Dillon before we let him out of here?
Other than the fact of best of luck, man. I really hope that first event works out in your favor, and
thank you.
Best of luck in all future endeavors, honestly.
Thanks, and thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, man, no problem. Before I let you get out of here, man, where are you based out of, bro?
Oh, so I was gonna mention something. I live in PA, but my sister goes to college in Michigan.
Where at?
Okay, where at?
I think Lansing, is it?
So then probably she goes to Michigan State?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so she's in East Lansing. I was going to say that because I thought I saw that you're in Pittsburgh. So I am going to be, well, hasn't really been announced yet. But anyways, I'm going to be making my way to Pittsburgh down to go see our friend El Rudo de las Chicas, Sam Adonis, who's doing his fucking thing over there in AAA with La Impresa, because he's based out of there. That's also the brother of the commentator for WWE, Corey Graves. They run a lot of shows out of Pittsburgh, and he hit me up just saying that they were getting ready to run a show and that he wanted me to come through to Pittsburgh. So if I come through to Pittsburgh, we might have to link up, and I'll bring you to some wrestling.
Definitely. Hit me up. We could train, do whatever.
I'm with it, dude. I'm always down to get some work in. That's why I'm looking forward to Vegas, man. First of all, to all the haters that are about to say what I'm about to say, fuck you. Anyways, Justin James, shout out to our homie who just fought for the UFC. You can't not respect the man that's got the balls to bet his whole fight purse on himself to win, okay? You cannot hate on a guy who bets 25 grand on himself in a UFC fight to win, and then, in my personal opinion, got fucked because of a shitty judge, but hey, that's neither here nor there. So I'm headed to Vegas in August for, this is actually going to be the last one of the big four that I've never gotten to go to. So my sister's getting married in Nashville in August 20th, and then I'm leaving at 7 o'clock in the morning from Nashville to go to Vegas for SummerSlam. So, awesome. Yeah, dude, we're about to be getting after it, dude. But like I said, now that I know, and if you couldn't tell from the shirt, this is actually from the first Mania that I went to out of town. But now that I know that you're a wrestling fan and we can relate over some jiu-jitsu, we'll definitely have to make that happen, whether it's when you come up here to Michigan or if I can make my way out to Pennsylvania, we'll definitely have to make it happen. But all of you guys who are watching this shit, if you got UFC Fight Pass, make sure you check out Fury Grappling Championship. Watch this man choke somebody the fuck out. Make sure you check it out July 2nd. And until next time, and in the in-between time,